Daniel was 22 years old, a college student who looked older than his age in the way exhaustion settles into a face. He worked two part-time jobs, one early in the morning unloading deliveries, another late at night cleaning offices after everyone else had gone home. Between classes, he counted tips and hours, not to buy new clothes or go out with friends, but to send money back home. His shoes were worn at the heel, his phone screen cracked, his backpack stitched up more times than he could remember. He told himself these were small prices to pay. He carried one clear dream through every long shift and sleepless night, lifting his mother out of poverty so she would never have to choose between food and dignity again. When professors talked about the future, Daniel imagined her sitting comfortably, finally resting, finally safe. His mother had raised him alone, quietly letting go of her own plans so he could keep his. She never talked about the education she left behind or the life she might have lived. She just showed up every day, steady and tired and determined. Her words stayed simple, almost casual, but they followed Daniel everywhere. "As long as you're okay, I'm okay." She said it when he left for school. She said it when he called late at night. She said it even when her voice sounded weak, even when she should have been the one being reassured. Daniel believed her, because believing her made it easier to keep going. He didn't see the nights she went to bed hungry. He didn't see how often she pretended not to be hungry at all. There were moments burned into his memory that came back to him later, uninvited. The sound of her pushing food toward him and saying she'd already eaten. The way she smiled while her stomach growled. The afternoon she took off her wedding ring, set it on the table and said it was just old jewelry anyway. Daniel didn't understand until weeks later when his school fees were suddenly paid in full. He thanked her. She waved it off. He never saw that ring again. These weren't grand sacrifices announced out loud. They were quiet decisions made when no one was watching. Decisions that shaped his life without asking for credit. Daniel carried all of that into the hospital room with him. Every skipped meal, every late-night shift, every promise he made to himself that one day it would all be worth it. But love doesn't stop hospital bills, and belief doesn't keep a heart monitor from flatlining. Didn't happen slowly. There was no long warning, no careful build-up that gave Daniel time to prepare. One moment his mother was standing in the kitchen, arguing lightly with him over the phone about whether he was eating enough. The next, she was on the floor, her body refusing to listen, her words slurring into sounds that didn't make sense. The neighbor called it in. The sirens came fast. By the time Daniel reached the hospital, his chest felt hollow, like something had already been taken from him. Doctors moved quickly, speaking in short sentences that carried too much weight. A sudden collapse, internal bleeding, emergency surgery needed immediately. Daniel nodded as if he understood, even though his hands were shaking so badly he had to sit on them. The surgery didn't go cleanly. Complications followed, stacking one on top of another, each one demanding more time, more equipment, more specialists. Hours blurred together. Machines breathed for her when she couldn't. When the surgeon finally spoke to Daniel again, the words sounded careful, measured, practiced. She survived the operation, but the risk wasn't over. Intensive care was necessary, continuous monitoring, medication that couldn't wait. Then came the part that changed everything. Insurance had denied coverage for the procedure due to a technicality buried deep in the policy. The tone shifted. Compassion remained, but limits were introduced. A cash deposit was required to continue treatment. The number didn't feel real. It felt like a typo someone refused to correct. Daniel stared at the paper, then at the doctor, waiting for someone to say there had been a mistake. Instead, he was told about timelines, about what could and couldn't be done, about what the hospital was and wasn't allowed to provide without payment. Finally, the sentence landed, quiet but final. "We need the payment within 48 hours. 48 hours to stop the machines from becoming decorations. 48 hours to turn desperation into money." The hallway smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Daniel leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, counting breaths, trying not to imagine what happened after the deadline passed. When he went back into the room, his mother was awake, her eyes glassy but focused. She tried to smile and failed. Her voice came out thin, strained. She apologized, not for the collapse, not for the pain, but for being, in her words, a burden. She told him he was young, that he had a future, that he shouldn't ruin his life for her. She told him gently to let her go if he had to. Daniel shook his head and forced his voice steady. "Everything's taken care of, Mom," he said, holding her hand tighter than he meant to. She searched his face, then nodded, choosing to believe him because believing him made it easier to rest. But nothing was taken care of, not even close. Daniel didn't freeze, he moved. He moved the way people do when stopping feels more dangerous than running. He started with friends, the ones who had studied beside him, laughed with him, promised they'd always be there. They listened. They cared. They were broke. Apologies filled his phone, each one sincere, each one useless. He called relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, swallowing pride with every ring. Some didn't answer. Some promised to check and never called back. Time kept passing anyway. He stared at the countdown on his phone like it might slow down if he watched closely enough. Next came the options he never thought he'd consider. Loan sharks who spoke softly and smiled too much, who didn't need paperwork but needed something else instead. Daniel felt it in his gut, the unspoken rules, the danger hiding behind politeness. He walked away, heart racing, knowing that borrowing from them didn't solve the problem, it only delayed a worse one. He went to his university's emergency fund office, sitting under fluorescent lights, explaining everything to a stranger who nodded sympathetically while typing. 2 days later, the response arrived. Rejected. Limited resources. High demand. Try again next semester. Daniel laughed once when he read it, a short, broken sound, then deleted the email. With nothing left, he turned to the internet. He wrote the fundraiser carefully, choosing words that felt honest without sounding desperate. He uploaded a photo of his mother smiling from better days. He shared it once, then again. He refreshed the page every few minutes, watching the number stay the same. Hours passed. Donations trickled in, small amounts from people he didn't recognize, kind but nowhere near enough. Most people scrolled past. Some paused. Then they kept going. The silence was louder than any rejection. It told him something he didn't want to hear. That need doesn't always attract help. Sometimes it just gets ignored. As night fell, Daniel wandered into a small hospital chapel he hadn't noticed before. The room was empty. No music, no candles lit, just wooden benches and the faint hum of the building around it. He sat alone, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. For the first time since the collapse, he stopped pretending to be strong. His voice barely made a sound. "God, I don't know how to do this." There was no answer, no sign, just quiet. And that's when his phone vibrated. The message was short, almost careful. A woman said she had seen his fundraiser online. She said she understood desperation. She asked if he would be willing to meet and talk. Daniel stared at the screen for a long time, reading it again and again, trying to hear a tone that wasn't there. Her name was Margaret. She was 60 years old, wealthy, confident in a way that comes from surviving long enough to stop apologizing for it, lonely in a way she didn't explain. She wasn't a villain, and she didn't pretend to be a hero. She simply said she wanted to listen. They met in a public cafe the next afternoon. Sunlight through the windows, cups clinking, normal life happening a few feet away. Daniel felt out of place, like everyone could see the weight he was carrying. Margaret arrived on time, dressed simply, no hurry in her movements. She asked about his classes, about his mother. She listened more than she spoke, her eyes steady, her questions gentle but direct. When he finished, she paused, stirring her coffee, then looked at him and asked the question that made his chest tighten. "How much do you need, really?" He told her the number, barely above a whisper. She nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. There was no contract slid across the table. No explicit terms, just silence that said enough. The imbalance sat between them, heavy and obvious. Daniel felt it. He hated it. He thought about standing up, walking away, choosing pride. Then his mother's face filled his mind, pale under hospital lights, trusting his promise. His hands trembled. He hesitated, caught between who he was and what was required of him. That night, Daniel crossed a line he swore he never would. The decision didn't feel dramatic when it finally happened. It felt quiet, heavy, inevitable. Daniel watched the transfer notification appear on his phone, the number large enough to change everything, small enough to disappear in seconds. He stared at it, then forwarded the confirmation to the hospital with a hand that no longer felt like his. Minutes later, the reply came back. Payment received, treatment approved, surgery scheduled. The words should have brought relief. Instead, they landed without warmth, like instructions. Somewhere in the building, a printer hummed and life continued as if nothing extraordinary had just been traded away. Daniel sat alone afterward, letting the silence press in. Shame didn't rush at him all at once. It arrived in pieces, in the way he avoided his own reflection, in the tightness in his chest when his phone buzzed with updates about his mother's condition. He wanted to celebrate the fact that she would live. He wanted to feel proud of what he'd done. But his thoughts tangled and he couldn't separate sacrifice from loss. He said nothing to anyone, not to friends, not to family. Some truths, he realized, feel too heavy to be spoken without breaking something else. When he finally went home, he stood under the shower longer than necessary, water pounding against his shoulders, steam filling the room. He scrubbed his skin hard as if effort alone could wash away the memory, the choice, the moment he agreed. The water turned cold before he noticed. He shut it off and stood there, breathing slowly, reminding himself why he'd done it. His mother would get another chance, another morning, another breath, and yet something inside him had shifted. He saved her life, but lost a piece of himself. The surgery was declared a success, at least in the way hospitals define that word. The immediate danger passed, the crisis contained, the machines gradually turned down instead of up. But recovery was slower than anyone hoped. Complications followed, not enough to take her life, but enough to stretch days into weeks and weeks into months. Daniel learned new routines, medication schedules, physical therapy appointments. Long hours sitting beside a bed, listening to monitors and reminding himself to breathe normally. Relief lived beside fear now, never fully replacing it. Each improvement felt fragile, like it could be taken back without warning. His mother thanked him often, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a smile that tried to be light. One afternoon, as he adjusted her blanket, she reached for his hand and held it longer than usual. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she said softly. The words were meant to be love. They landed like weight. Daniel nodded and looked away, afraid his face would give him away. He wondered if she could hear the truth in his silence. He wondered if love could exist without honesty, or if the lie had already begun to change everything between them. Outside the hospital, another thread tightened. Margaret kept texting. At first, simple check-ins, then longer messages. She asked how he was sleeping, how he was holding up. She wanted to talk, not about money, but about feelings, about connection, about the space they now shared. Daniel read the messages and didn't respond. He told himself distance would solve it, that if he ignored it long enough, it would fade. Instead, the tension grew, pressing in from a direction he couldn't explain to anyone else. He carried two lives now, one built on gratitude and recovery, the other on silence and a debt that wasn't financial. But secrets don't stay buried forever. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that feels safe because nothing unusual is supposed to happen. Daniel had stepped into the hallway to take a call, his voice low, his back against the wall. He didn't notice his mother's door was slightly open. He didn't see the nurse pause. He didn't know the words he chose would carry. He said Margaret's name. He said thank you. He said he couldn't keep doing this. There was a long silence on the line, then a quiet reply he didn't respond to. When he hung up and turned back toward the room, everything felt different, like the air had shifted without warning. His mother was awake, too awake. Her eyes weren't confused or tired. They were clear, fixed on him in a way he hadn't seen before. She didn't ask questions. She didn't raise her voice. She just watched him, waiting. Daniel tried to speak, then stopped. The truth rose in his chest, heavy and unavoidable. He sat beside her bed and told her everything haltingly, clumsily, leaving nothing out. The room filled with a silence so complete it felt loud. Tears slid down her face, not fast, not dramatic, just steady. There was no anger in her expression, only heartbreak. She reached for his hand, squeezing it with what strength she had left. "I never wanted to live if it cost you this." Margaret stepped back quietly without announcement or explanation. The messages stopped. The tension loosened. Days later, the hospital confirmed that the remaining bills had been paid in full, cleared without a name attached. Only a short note accompanied the confirmation, passed along by an administrator who didn't know its weight. "No one should have to buy survival." Daniel read it twice, then once more, letting the words settle where the shame had been living. It didn't erase what happened. It didn't rewrite the choice, but it closed the door gently, giving him space to breathe again without looking over his shoulder. For the first time in weeks, he slept without waking in panic, without replaying the same moment over and over, wondering who he had become. In the hospital room, recovery moved forward one careful step at a time. Daniel sat beside his mother, their hands linked, neither pretending anymore. Tears came easily now, shared instead of hidden. She squeezed his hand the way she used to when he was a child and scared of things he couldn't name yet. She asked him the familiar question, the one that had always meant love. "Have you eaten?" Daniel smiled through tears and shook his head. She took a breath, steady and present, and answered herself this time. "Now I'll eat because you're here." Sometimes survival asks too much. Sometimes love pushes us into choices we never imagined, forcing us to weigh life against dignity, hope against pride. Daniel's story reminds us that sacrifice can leave invisible scars, even when it saves the people we love most. And no matter the circumstances, no one should bear that weight alone. It's a quiet truth we often forget. Love can be both beautiful and unbearably heavy, and even the strongest hearts need support. Now think for a moment, what would you have done in his place? Could you have carried the weight he did? Was this love or desperation? Could survival justify choices that haunt a lifetime? If this story stayed with you, like it did with us, hit like. And subscribe for stories that remind us what being human really costs.